Hello and welcome to the Newsman's foreign policy presentation, Geopolitica. We start off with news from the United States. United States military has formally launched a Space Force unit in South Korea with an objective to better monitor rivals. The United States Senate passes $858 billion National Defense Authorization Act. It will strengthen defense partnership with countries like India, Taiwan, and will lead to joint research and development, defense, and cyber capabilities. Already, India has signed 4 foundational agreements with the United States. House January 6 committee has concluded that Donald Trump was criminally engaged in a multi-part conspiracy to overturn the lawful results of the 2020 presidential elections. USA was hit by winter storm blizzard. 1,700 US flights cancelled and 48 were killed. The US FDA has granted approval for a new Alzheimer drug, Leqembi. Alzheimer is a leading cause of dementia. Today, the Hindu editorial talks about how the United States seems unable to bring tight control on assault weapons. In January 2023 alone, there has been 38 mass shooting incidents in 17 different states. In the United States, there are about 120 guns for every 100 residents. Arguments against a strong gun control law include Second Amendment protection, which guarantees the right to bear arms, self-defense, hunting, and recreation. This year, American Congress passed the widest firearm legislation, which expanded background checks for gun purchases under 21. However, the Supreme Court struck down a New York state law on carrying guns outside the home, reaffirming the Second Amendment and hindering attempts for strict state legislation. This article talks about how the United States is turning away from free trade and moving towards protectionism. The World Trade Organization has ruled that the steel and aluminium tariffs imposed by the United States are incompatible with Article 11.1 of the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. This is one of the examples of how the world is moving away from neoliberal to a more geo-economic order. In the neoliberal order, the economic and security interests are independent and it promotes free trade. The United States supported it and led it. But in the geo-economic order, the economic and security tracks converge. An example of this will be the United States embracing protectionism. If the United States turns its back on rule-based order, other countries will brazenly pursue economic nationalism. The second US-Africa summit took place in Washington with the participation of 49 African countries. States will support African Union's bid to join the G20 and will support reform of the UN Security Council. In contrast, the Chinese are the largest trading partner of Africa with the annual China-Africa trade of about $254 billion. If India wants to be heard as the voice of the Global South, it should help Africa achieve Agenda 2063. Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Signed by the European Union, it is the world's first carbon border tariff. It will require companies, both domestic and overseas, to buy certificates to cover their embedded CO2 emissions. In Qatargate, Eva Kaili, a vice president of the European Union, was arrested for taking bribes from Qatar to influence policies. Qatar pushed for influence because it wanted to sell natural gas to the European Union and avoid criticism for its kafala labor system. The European Union adopts 15% global minimum tax. This will curb base erosion and profit sharing. Croatia adopts euro and joins the passport-free Schengen zone. Sweden discovers the biggest rare earth deposit in Europe. Rare earth elements are used in critical sectors like mobile, electric vehicles, and defense. UK brings legislation to regulate labour strikes. This will mandate minimum service levels in key public sectors like health and education. Another news from the United Kingdom, UK-Japan Defence Pact will allow troop deployment. Moving to the tropics, 77-year-old leftist leader Lula da Silva returns for a third term as Brazilian president. Shifting our focus to Asia, China opens after 3 years and finally dismantles its zero-COVID policy. Chinese startup Landscape will launch a rocket using methane as fuel. Methane is cleaner and safer than other fuels currently being used as rocket fuel. The Chinese authorities have rolled out new regulations to restrict the use of deepfake technology. Deepfake uses artificial images and audio put together by machine learning algorithms to replace a real person's appearance and voice. It can be used for scam and election manipulation. The Taliban signs an oil deal with the Chinese firm Xinjiang Central Asia Petroleum and Gas Company. Moving north, Japan increases defense spending to 2% of the GDP by 2027 to counter China. To decongest Tokyo and revitalize rural towns, Japan offers money to Tokyo residents to move out. A bit of background for this story. The 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster was caused by an earthquake and tsunami that led to 3 nuclear meltdowns at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, resulting in the evacuation of 160,000 people. Now Japan will flush 1.25 million ton of Fukushima wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. In news from Israel, 7,000-year-old cotton fiber originating in the Indus Valley was found. The newly formed Netanyahu government vows to legalize dozens of outposts in the West Bank and annexed it. Now, what is West Bank? It forms the bulk of Palestinian territories but is under Israeli military. The Oslo Accord of 1993 gave Palestine some autonomy. Moving to South Asia, pro-China tilting Pushp Kamal Dahal Prachanda has become the new Prime Minister of Nepal. Prachanda will have to prove majority in 30 days. In this coalition, UML head KP Oli has 78 seats, so he will call the shots. Due to rise in cost of food and fuel, protests against Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh increase. Finally, moving to India, Rupee Trade Settlement Mechanism draws interest from Tajikistan, Luxembourg, Cuba and Sudan. Rupee Trade Settlement Mechanism uses rupees instead of dollars for international transactions. By internationalization of Indian currency rupee, it will lead to reduced vulnerability to external shocks and currency risks. The Andaman-Aceh link connects the Sabang city of Indonesia with Andaman Nicobar Islands. Why it is important? Because Sabang overlooks the Andaman Sea and the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world, with over 70,000 ships passing through it annually. Russia supplies first batch of the TVS-2M nuclear fuel to India for the Kundakulam nuclear power plant. India and Austria signed migration and mobility agreement to curb illegal migration. Shifting our focus to Oceania, India should boost ties with Maldives as former Maldivian President Abdullah Yameen is convicted by a criminal court and thus is debarred from elections. This is a sign of relief for India as Abdullah Yameen had close links with China and led the India Out campaign. And finally, India-Australia Trade Pact comes into force. This trade pact is expected to increase trade between these two countries to US $45 to $50 billion in the next 5 years. India will take over the G20 presidency for 1 year. It can use it to pursue an inclusive financial agenda. It includes reallocation of the IMF's $650 billion special drawing rights and fixing of the common framework for debt treatment.